Thanks so much, Abby. I've just got to let that settle. Give it the nod, Robert. Is that you? Good man, thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks, members, for turning out to that very frosty morning we had in regards to site visits in early afternoon. But really good day, so it has been up to now. Item number 6 is where we're left. I suppose I should I'm not going to go through all the team stuff because nobody's on teams apart from where I've got, but just support from our solicitor, and I think Fiona's here if required. All members are here. We've got Robert here as our independent planner advisor, and we've got Tracy here as well as the head of governance and clerk. So I won't go through the team stuff, the script, but it's in a meeting. It's starting because it was adjourned for 2 site visits in particular. So I think, Robert, you're going to go through the slides first in regards to, we'll go item 5 first. Thank you. Green, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to go through the slides and then summarise the site visit, if that's okay. So these are the same slides that were shown at the meeting that took place on the 31st of October, where you were minded to continue the item. If you just, sorry, if you bear with me, I'll just get the actual public pack up because they're contained within that. So these are the documents.
Can you share that on the screen?
Yeah.
As soon as I see it on here, or if it's not in there, I'll
yeah, the case officer photos are the same as those that appear in your papers that you have from that meeting on pages 525 to 528. So once it comes up, I will show them and I'll share them. 525 to 528.
Is that item 6? 5.
Sorry, 301 to 304.
Sandhead.
No, sorry, we're doing Sandhead first.
Item 5.
Right, okay. So apologies, that's where I'm getting confused.
The site visit's fair enough, so it's confusing. That's where I was getting confused.
Yeah, okay, apologies. So you're looking at, yeah, as I've been corrected, the case officer photos in pages 301 to 304 of the papers that you have in front of you from the meeting on the 31st of October. So I'll just try and do this again. Apologies for the technical breakdown. Okay.
Bingo.
So looking at the first image that you have on your screen and also on your Teams in front of you as well, this is an aerial view with the application site highlighted in red. You can see the building there within the kind of corner of that wider field. And you've got a view of the U102W public road, that's looking eastwards. Again, with the application site on the left-hand side, which we visited earlier, you'll notice that large tree, which is just in the corner of the access point. The third slide is a view in the opposite direction. It's from the same public road looking west, and you've got the application site on the right-hand side here. You can just see that brick facade of that building there, and the fibre cement roof. So that's on the right-hand side, and that's where the access point was as well. It's just out of camera shot here in the foreground. That's looking straight at, looking north towards the application site. And again, you'll recognise that from earlier. And this is a view from within the application site. It's looking south towards the U102W public road and beyond. This is a view, sorry, I've gone too far there. That's a view of the agricultural shed on the site looking towards the northeast. And that's an aerial view of the site confirming the existing cartilage. So that's the building. You've got the concrete apron there, you've got the access to it, which is what we saw earlier. The agent had obviously pegged out part of the land next to it, which was to reflect the boundary that you can see here on image number 8. So that's an aerial view of the site with the proposed development overlaid, which confirms the extent of the proposed development out with the current cartilage on the greenfield land, and that's what's been provided by the case officer. That also highlights discrepancies in the plotting of the existing building and the concrete apron as well, so there's a slight variation there. So moving on to the site visit, myself as independent planning advisor, the committee clerk, Tracy Sonko, councillors Carruthers, Giusti, Howie, Johnson, Thompson and Walters, we all undertook a site visit at 12:30 today. We were also accompanied by Edwin Adamson, who's acting as agent in this case on behalf of the applicant. So we started the site visit about 5 minutes early, about 12:25. We walked across to the site from the public road just to the south. We walked up to the building. We observed the pegged out area next to it, which the agent had already done. And we looked around inside the building and looked around and generally took notes as well. And I think everyone found it was helpful to try and understand what the proposal was. I think from memory, I think we finished on site at about 10:1. And I don't think really there's anything more to note than that, just that that site visit took place. Again, the request originally came at the committee meeting of the 31st of October, and the procedure notice was sent out to the applicant in relation to that at the tail end of last year. One of the key things really to note from that is that the local review body advised that they wanted to undertake the site visit earlier today to allow the applicant to peg out the boundary of the site as existing and proposed, to enable the local review body to determine if the proposed development would be partly located on greenfield land out with the curtilage of the former agricultural building. The other purpose of it was generally to allow you to familiarise themselves more fully with the application site and its environs. And there was no discussion of the merits of the case during the actual site visit, although there were some questions which were asked and clarification was provided by both myself and the applicant's agent as well, so that was quite a helpful exercise. So it's really just the follow-up meeting now to reconvene and determine the item or the next process if members want further process in this case.
No, thanks so much for that, Robert. So any points of clarity on the site visit, the slides that we've just had? We'll get Tracy to run through where we left the meeting at and where we're at now, and we'll get into it at that point. So any further points we'll pick up then. Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'll not go through the full notes that were read out at the October meeting, but I'll just summarise. So for a refresher, the grounds for refusal, which were on page 264 of the papers, that the proposed development is contrary to Dumfries Galloway Council Local Development Plan 2, Policy H3, and the related supplementary guidance and National Planning Framework 4, Policies 9 and 17, which only permit the erection of new houses in the countryside in particular circumstances, and none of these circumstances apply in this case. Specifically, the proposal is not considered to represent beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site, as the existing site is not demonstrably intrusive visually or environmentally, and the condition of the site does not significantly detract from the amenity of the surrounding area. The development would extend beyond the previously developed area into greenfield land and would exceed the minimum required to remove dereliction, and the proposed development would not be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. The main issues for the local review body to consider were that would the proposal comply with the terms of the development plan? In particular, does the proposal meet the terms of LDP2 Policy H3 and the guidance set out in the adopted LDB2 supplementary guidance in relation to the principle of the proposed development at this application site? Would the proposal fail to comply with MPF4 Policies 9 and 17? In particular, would the proposal meet the terms of point 2 of MPF4 Policy 17 as claimed by the applicant? Would the development extend previously beyond the developed area into greenfield land, and would this exceed the minimum required to remove dereliction? And if so, would that represent a departure from the development plan? Does the proposal represent a situation which would represent the reuse of a brownfield land, as defined in the glossary within MPF 4, where a return to a natural state has not or will not happen without intervention? It is accepted that the proposed development would fail to comply with the terms of LTP2 Policy H3 by virtue of the fact that the proposal would not represent the beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site as defined in the glossary of terms within LTP2. It is agreed that the existing site is not demonstrably intrusive visually or environmentally. It is agreed that the condition of the site does not significantly detract from the amenity of the surrounding area, and would the proposed development not be suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area? How much weight would members wish to attach to the local review body decision taken in relation to planning permission 221165 FUL at West Galdenock Farm? If it is not considered that the proposal does not accord with the terms of the development plan, and are there a set of material considerations of sufficient weight to justify a departure from the terms of the development plan, and if so, on what grounds would such a decision be made, and what reasons would members give for such a decision if it was considered that the proposal departs from the development plan? If members are minded to reverse the appointed officer's decision and grant planning permission, what set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? And if members are minded to vary the terms of the appointed officer's decision, what changes to the specific reasoning for the decision would be required, and what additional policies would be referenced? So, as previously outlined at the October meeting, the options available are to decide that you have, we've already decided that and we've had the site visit. So, it will be to either uphold, reverse or vary the decision of the appointed officer. And we also have our solicitor online who's able to assist. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that, Tracy. So, just on that very point, and so we've considered it, the only reason we stopped, we felt we had enough information other than the site visit. But Councillor Justice wanting in. Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, it's just a question for Robert Duncan at this point in time. In our delegated report, under the reasons for refusal, one of the bullet points is the existing site is not demonstrably intrusive visually or environmentally, and the condition of the site does not significantly distract from the immediacy of the surrounding area. When I look at MPF 4, Robert, there's no mention of if a brownfield site needs to be intrusive or visually impactful or environmentally impactful. There's no mention of those impacts. So why are we looking at that today? When if it's a brownfield site, it's a brownfield site, and that's in MPF 4.
So would that be why was it considered then by the case officer at the time in real terms? Because that was the reason for refusal.
Yeah, that's what I'm going on there.
Thanks, Chair. My reading of this is obviously the development plan as it stands at the moment. You've got LDP2, which was adopted in October 2019. You've also got MPF 4, which became part of the development plan at the tail end of February 2023, if my memory is right. Now, both of these elements form part of the development plan. So when you're considering a case, you're looking at all of the relevant policies from both of those documents. So it's not just a case of looking at MPF 4 and one particular policy or point within that. You've got to look at all the other developments. So you've got policy H3 of LDP2, you've got the supplementary guidance in LDP2 that's relating to housing in the countryside that you have to take into account. Then you've got the MPF 4 policy which relates to housing in the countryside, which I'm just looking up just now. I think it's policy 16 or 17. Let me just check, because I'm keen to have a look at that wording to see what it says. But it's from looking at a combination of those policies, trying to work out, the case officers trying to work out what things need to be addressed, if you like, which parts of the policy need to be covered in that decision. And so the reason for refusal is reflecting the wider kind of consideration of all the relevant housing in the countryside policies. The relevant policy, just finding it now, there's the quality homes policy, which is policy 16, which is relevant, but policy 17 in MPF 4, as you probably know, part A says development proposals for new homes in rural areas will be supported where the development is suitably scaled, sited and designed to be in keeping with the character of the area. So that's the first part. That applies to a house in the countryside, whatever the circumstances that justify it in principle. Then you've got bullet points under the Roman numerals. So, for example, 1, if it's on a site allocated for housing within the development, it has to have both of these things satisfied, if you like. For a brownfield site, it's if it reuses brownfield land where a return to a natural state has not or will not happen without intervention. So it's looking at the wider policy considerations for housing in the countryside.
Well, Chair, I would come in and I would move that we overturn the officer's decision. And in the first version of this meeting, I read a lot of MPF4, sorry. So I've got a wee bit of a sore throat today. I can do that again, but it's going to be very similar to what I said last time, Tracy, in the sense that I think we've established today that this is a brownfield site. I don't think there's much argument there. The main argument was about the curtilage issue, which goes into what's seen as a field in the greenfield site. That's not going to be used in the building of the actual building aspect of this. That's going to be used as a turning area, and the logistics, as we've seen, to make that a safer area to come in and out as a driveway. I'm quite happy that this meets with MPF4, Chair. We've got proof that it reuses a brownfield site. It is a brownfield site. I think your locale, there's a new build on a prominent hill, just a short drive up the hill that we've seen. It's in a more prominent area. I think this is quite a hidden development in the sense of the environment. So not many folk are going to see this. So I think we're okay at the minute. I think we could put this through. I can come back with some more formal words later on, but I'll be interested to hear what other members have got to say at the minute.
Thanks so much for that, Andrew. Councillor Thompson, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I was, after today's visit, I was wanting to look again at just to refresh my memory on the reasons why it was refused. So I'm just looking at, it's page 254 of the pack. And I think, I'm sympathetic to the fact that this would be a beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site. Whether or not it's visible, you could say, well, if it's not visible, then the brownfield site's not going to be an impact on the amenity because nobody can see it. So I think there's a wee bit of we'll probably have to be careful if we say, well, nobody's going to see a new development there either, so because it's going to be equally visible. But it's definitely a brownfield site. The building's in sort of a state of disrepair, if you like, and I think there's scope for a positive development there. So I'm sympathetic to that. In terms of the second point, I think there's no argument really that the development would extend beyond the previously developed area into a greenfield land. But then you could argue, well, that's one thing to consider, but there might be other positive factors in its merit. So I'm still sort of thinking about that because clearly there's a pragmatic case which we saw on site today for the turning circle and the access from the road, and what that might have to look like, and how far you'd have to go into the neighbouring bit of land, as it were. And the third bit is the bit that's most interesting for me, is about the scale of the potential development, because I think the nature of the site means it would almost, if you were to sort of be sympathetic to what's there already, it would have to be kind of long and narrow, if you like, for want of a better expression. And I noticed that the proposed development, as was considered, is kind of long and narrow, but it's kind of high in the middle, to the tune of about 7.9 metres or something like that. So there is a potential question, and again, I'd like to hear from other members about the scale and massing of this particular development. Not to say that a development wouldn't be suitable here, but I've certainly got a few questions about that. So I think I'm of the view that subjectively anyway, it could be a potential amenity to develop a brownfield site, but I see Laura's maybe wanting to come in on something in relation to that potentially. Thank you, Chair.
Laura, do you need to come in now, or do you want to come in at the end once you've heard the kind of views of what people are thinking, or is it a point that somebody said that you think is important to cover now?
Thank you, Chair. It was in response actually to Councillor Giusti, because as with him, I'd had a look at NPF4 and also LDP2, couldn't see the wording of that ground of refusal. It was to be of help to the committee. It's in the supplementary guidance at paragraphs 5.5 through to 5.7, where although the wording is not lifted directly from that, the the assessment that the planner has gone through when looking at it, I think, has been influenced by the supplementary guidance, as I say, from 5.5 through to 5.7, where it's pointed out that just because something is a brownfield site, it doesn't mean that it's necessary going to be suitable to develop on it. And it's looking at the detraction and visual and environmental amenity are two of the things that are specifically mentioned in 5.6.
Thank you. Thanks for that clarity. Councillor Thompson, Stephen.
Yeah, thanks. And I said that in a much clumsier way maybe when I came in, but it's the thing is that it's on the sort of the corner of roads. It's accessible. I wouldn't say it was invisible, so I think you'd have to say it is visible, and potentially what's there already doesn't add to the amenity of the area, in my view. So I would resist saying that it's hidden away, because then it's like, well, you wouldn't see if it was looking minging anyway, because you couldn't see it. But so I think it is visible. So whatever's put there will be visible as well. But I think it could be done more sympathetically than what is effectively a derelict building, which I think is visible and does reduce the amenity, in my view. On that point, anyway, there's other issues about scale and massing and stuff, but that's my view, just to help with that. Thanks.
No, it sounds like in general terms there's a feeling towards supporting the application, but there's some questions over the fact that its size and scale in particular. I'll just reflect quickly in regards to the site visit, and my thoughts are, because I don't see anybody else want to come in at this moment in time. So we had the site visit, and as been outlined, it was quite clear because it extended, for me, but the predominant reason was because it extended into a part of a field in real terms, so it took it into a greenfield beyond the brownfield site itself. That point had to be clarified. So that was, I thought it had been imposed improperly, but it hadn't. It was accurate. But we did see when we were on site that it had been pegged out. We could see how it extended 4 or 5 metres beyond the brownfield, what we've seen as the brownfield site, beyond into the actual field itself. So with the query in regards to why was that, we got that question asked and answered. The answer was that because of where the existing access is coming in, so for 2 reasons in particular. One was to come in, create the right geometries in regards to turning circles, turning areas when you get on the site. And secondly was in regards to visibility displays in particular, creating that proper environment which the roads department would insist on by the way of a roads condition. So then visibility displays have to be to the proper standard for the sake of health and safety, access, egress to the public road from that potential residential property. Bring it up to today's standards, in other words. So I was happy with that, because if we were going to encroach from a brownfield site into a field, we have to be able to justify that. And I felt it was justified because it's not going to be built. It's not like asking to build a house in there or a building. It's for a turning circle and amenity. So it will be partly grass, partly a wee bit hard standing for the turning circle, which doesn't really have an impact at all. And we look at the way, we also look beyond that in the field, the way the field's structured. And it's a small pocket of land where if you were chasing, whether it's a cow, a calf, a sheep, whatever it was, it's the kind of bit where they always get caught and stuck. Whereas if that fencing was taken up and moved naturally in line where the road is, with access is beyond that going into the next field, it would you tend to design a field like that nowadays. If that's what you do, you design it so everything flows and it throws the animals in a particular direction, and that is contorted the way it is. So I don't have a detrimental effect that way either. So the brownfield site, beneficial brownfield site, is it a beneficial redevelopment of brownfield site? I would say it is a bit of an eyesore as it is. Is it going to return back to a natural state? So I'm thinking MPF 4, I think it's policy 17 has been allowed in part 2 in particular. There's not a chance it'll return back to that in the next 100 years if we just leave it the way it is. I think Councillor Walters and I in particular had a focus in that and an interest in regards to how long is it set for, because had it been a facade, but now you can see at least 15 or 20 years since that building's been used for any purpose whatsoever. For the composting inside, we knew that it turned out so it looks like real soil in real terms inside. The cement roof that was damaged inside, the gutters on the outside, the doors, the type of railings are antiquated now. We wouldn't even use that now. The ivy and the growth inside, just the whole overgrowth, it hadn't been touched for a long, long time. It was like going into Narnia in real terms. So is it ever got to come back? It'll take 100 years for that to come back to that particular state. So I do think it would be a beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site, but then it comes back to the size, the scale and the massing. It would be a reasonably big house, that. There's no two ways about it. But it's a full application. I think it was an in principle, an in principle in real terms. There'll be no doubts about it whatsoever. So the only slight doubt is the size and scale. It is a big house. It's not big, but it's a reasonable sized house. It'll be a good 4-bedroom house, but there's big demand in that, especially in this area as well. So it wouldn't be a showstopper for me, the size and scale, because I think getting rid of that derelict building, getting the slight encroachment into the greenfield, and that, I think I've argued my case, so at least reasoned it why I would see that as be able to justify going beyond that in regards to just leaving it there. And it would benefit that to the local housing stock, bring people back into this area, help the regeneration too. Maybe that goes beyond the realms that we're looking at directly today. But that's my thoughts, members. It aligns predominantly, again, fairly much in line with what's been said up to now, but there is still maybe some further questions, but it's for other members to think and contemplate. But we've got 3 members that are absolutely clear on what they're thinking. Councillor Thompson, Stephen, yep.
It's actually just a point of, so can I just double check? So in terms of, and it's maybe one for Robert to assist with maybe, so the footprint of the current building, current development, in terms of the concrete area, apron, I think we were sort of using the term today, that's a height of, is it 9.15 metres, that current building? That seems awfully, maybe I'm just thinking that, but I'm sure that says that in the report, original report. And then the maximum height of the proposed new development would be 7.9 and something metres. So I know when we talk about the front footprint, it's like the area in the ground, but just in terms of the scale of what's there just now and the scale of what could potentially be there, in terms of the length, are they of a similar length, Robert? And it's just to get that sense of proportionate, you know, if you're replacing like for, maybe not like for like, but, you know, something to the scale that was developed before. I suppose it's just to get a sense of what that is in terms of the detail. I don't know if you can help with that, Robert.
If you don't mind, Steve, can I just add to that in as far as the volume as well? So it's not just about it's not just about volume, but sorry, again, so it is the length and the area, fair enough, the footprint, but I think when the size and mass, and you look at the whole thing, the volume, because I think with that taking off that couple of metres, I'll say it reduces the whole size and mass, and that's what I kind of, because it is a big building. When you look at that, you look at inside it, you think, nah, this is a fair lump of a building. If this was a house, it'd be a big house if you're renovating it, so to speak. But it's not the type of building you renovate anyways. But Robert, that question was directed at you.
Okay, thanks, Chair. I think the most helpful thing I can do, well, there's 3 things. Firstly, share on the teams at the elevations you have as existing, which are on page 229 of your papers. So if I can do that first, and then I'll do similarly for the proposed house. Okay, so you should hopefully see that in front of you at the moment. So I'm just sharing my screen here. So that gives you an idea of the length of the building. In terms of dimensions, what you've got there is the shown length as being 23.2 metres. And these are external measurements. Across the way, it's 9.15 metres. And when you look at the sectional drawing, so this is now moving down to page 231, or I think, sorry, bear with me, because I'm on to the next drawing. Yeah, it's further across here. So this is still on page 229 of your papers. When you look at that dimension up to the roof apex, it's showing it as 5.24, but you've got a wee bit above that, so it's probably something slightly in the order of 5.25 to 5.3. So that's from ground level to roof apex as existing. Now, the second thing that's probably helpful to you is the drawing that's again in your papers. This is on page 231. So this is showing the proposed dwelling house on the unit. And again, I'll zoom in here to try and get some of the dimensions in greater clarity. So if you're looking at that dimension there, which is across the widest part, if you like, of the house, that's 8.60, so that's about 8.6. Then it narrows down slightly to either side from that. In terms of the length of the development, you're looking at this element here being 7.176, then you've got the central element here being 8.6 metres, and then you've got the other element along at the end here coming in at less than that. But the overall dimension which is shown is 26.386 metres, so that's the length of it. And in terms of your height, what you're looking at there, the cross section shows the roof apex down to kind of ground level, shown in that dimension as just being a fraction under 8 metres. So it is larger. The other thing I was going to show at the moment was the photograph where you've got the application site and the existing building with the overlay of the proposed development, which is the one we looked at during the site visit and the one which we looked at on the screen just earlier during this presentation. If you bear with me, I think it was page 301, somewhere around about there. That's the one I'm looking for. So, oops. So what you're looking at there is you're looking at the original building. It's maybe not so clear here without looking at that, but you've got the original building there, you've got the access to that building, the concrete apron round about it, and then what you've got below that superimposed is the proposed dwelling house. So you can see that, so you've got an element of it going beyond the dotted line, you've got that part of the turning area that was talked about as well, and then you've got that septic tank and herringbone system in that greenfield part. So hopefully that explains how the two compare the existing building to the proposed, certainly in terms of dimensions.
Oh, thank you. So I think, yeah, so there's a wee bit of a factual bit, which is like the new development would go into the what is currently a greenfield bit, slightly, judging from what you've just said there. But I think where I'm at is like, I've got some sympathy for what's been proposed, because I think I don't like derelict buildings generally, because I don't think they're any good for anybody. And I think if we're of a view that, yeah, it's a derelict building, then a redevelopment would seem to be a good thing to take forward. However, it's whether or not it would be within policy or an exception to policy. And this is where I maybe would want to check, because if we're saying that the bulk of that site is within a brownfield bit with a derelict building on it, and a new development could benefit the amenity of the area and provide housing, for example, and it'd be a change of use to what it was. However, yes, it does extend beyond the previously developed area into greenfield land. I think we've established that as a matter of fact. But it extends beyond it, but it's not predominantly in it, I would say, if that makes sense.
Can I just get that clarity? Because I thought it extended. Apologies. You didn't mind sharing that again, please, Robert, just because it's a point, because when I was looking at it, I thought it was on the footprint of the brownfield, but beyond the footprint of the building itself. I didn't think the building went beyond and into the actual green area, but I thought they had that, and that's part of my description. So, no, I could be wrong though, that's why it's worth being clarified. Yeah. No, you could be absolutely right though, I just wanted to be clear myself, because I think that's the most important. I was going to bring that question up at the very end, in regards to policy, and that's why I mentioned NPF 417 Part 2 in particular, because I would have thought it does align itself to that, but you've got other local development plan 2 stuff that we need to have a discussion over. Yep.
So in terms of the H3 tests, if it's a beneficial development of a brownfield site, that would get it into the H3 sort of area of what could be considered permissible if it meets that test, because any one of those things, isn't it? But it's just that there's a bit of it, as far as I could see. So out with the dotted. No, it's fine. But on the screen there, there's the dotted line that goes within that shows where the new proposed development is in the bottom picture. Is that right, Robert? And you'll see that a wee element of the proposed building goes out to the right of that. So that's in what is currently the greenfield site. So it's not just the turnings, it's not just the sort of access to utilities and amenities, that sort, so that's definitely to the right of that. So, but a marginal amount, I would suggest. But so it's predominantly within the derelict building site, is what I'm saying. So that's where I'm sympathetic to that. And then it's, I suppose, up to what weight we would give to potential redevelopment of a brownfield site if it just goes over the line a bit. and we think, well, that's contrary to policy, but within the scope of the actual development, does it outweigh the sort of disbenefit, if you like? And I think that's where I'm getting at. So just to be sort of technically on the line with it, do you know what I mean? And then it gets down to the bit about the scale and massing. So I think I'd misread the front page of the papers. I was thinking that's not 9 metres high. Anyway, so clearly there's a part of the new development that's proposed to be 7.9, just under 8 metres, which is, you know, considerably taller at that point than the existing building. But most of the other building is within, although it's longer, but it's thinner, if you see what I mean. So you know, you could actually do a volume equation. I know the prelims are coming up for the folk at high school, so maybe it's a good time to get the maths revision in. But so there is maybe, you could probably argue that it may be much of a muchness in terms of volume. So in terms of scale, there's a case you could argue that, I guess. So I think this is where I'm on the border with, if you see what I mean. So, but my first bit is to knock out that first bit about the derelict building. I would always lean towards getting rid of derelict buildings in this region if we can somehow, as long as we're staying at least close to policy, or if an exception can be made that there's good reasons for it. And that's basically where I'm at, Chair. Thanks.
Robert, you give some advice?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was something that was considered at the site visit. What you're looking at, for the avoidance of doubt, here in page 304 were pictures that were provided by the case officer for the purposes of this local review body. And what the case officer has done with photograph 7 is used an aerial view of the site, confirming what they think the existing curtilage is. So you've got the building, you've got the concrete apron, you've got the access. The rest of it is the parcel of land that's associated with that building. So it's all enclosed by a boundary. That building is within that area of land. The area of land to the right-hand side of that is reading as something beyond another fence. There's a boundary line there, so that's a separate field, if you like. So that's basically the interpretation. You've clearly got the building there, the concrete apron, and you've got what's considered to be the cartilage. In terms of the definition of brownfield land, and this was something that also came up during the site visit, what MPF 4 says, and this is on page 146 of that document, it simply says it's land which has previously been developed, and it says the term may cover vacant or derelict land, land occupied by redundant or unused buildings, and developed land within the settlement boundary where further intensification of use is considered acceptable. So that's the extent of the definition of brownfield land in MPF 4, and because that's the most recent expression of policy in the development plan, that's the one that prevails over the one that's set out in LDP 2. So I hope that helps.
Yep. So we've got a feeling of supporting it. We're going over some technical points, but personally I feel that the benefits, it's probably come back to your point, Stephen, but the benefits of the redevelopment of this piece of land, this brownfield site, outweighs the disbenefits, or the pros outweigh the cons, because to say that wee encroachment in a bit of greenfield land, which is like a dog leg anyway, so it's almost a waste piece to a field, hardly gets used. I think the benefits, and what's I suppose not been touched on, is the fact that the big muckle end at the bottom end of that is actually garages. Okay? If they were detached, it would look like a completely different proposal, but I mean, an integral garage, so to speak, is very attractive to a lot of people, when it comes to having your house, it being attached, so you've got access straight from that, being in your outside clothes, being changed in a warm environment as you move into your house. It's got a lot of benefits, including being part of the plant room and so on and so forth. But Laura, you want to come in and just touch on some of the things, Laura?
Thanks very much, Chair. It was to just follow on with what Robert was saying. Sorry, apologies. I think, like everybody, I've got a touch of the lurgy at the moment. The policy H3 on brownfield in LDP2 has always been that it doesn't include agricultural, and I know that in other planning application committees what we have said about the interplay between LDP2 and MPF 4 is that rather than seeing them as being in conflict, it's seen as being a local refinement on NPF 4, so that you wouldn't necessarily have to feel tied to giving NPF 4 precedence in this, because they could be read to be seen as being complementary with each other as a further sort of refinement of the policy. I know that's a a position that has been adopted previously at Planning Application Committee.
Yep. No, I'm aware of that. That's almost like a custom and practice thing, but it's each case on its own merits. I don't have to rehearse that to yourself, Laura, by any means. And it's always the view that I take. You look at each case on its own merits and go back to the we're going right back to the start with this, and it's like, how do we interpret this? I remember asking a question. I'm trying to try and put the point you put there into context, my view in regards to that. When I asked the question, it was a Pat Han at the time, historically a planning officer employed by the council. And I said, I referred to the DPA. I said, decisions that are made there. Any decision that, so say a plan application had been to committee, was referred to the Department of Planning and Environment Appeals, it was overturned, would that then have a material, I suppose, situation where the council would have to respect that decision and take that, would that be a material consideration in time to come for the council making decisions? And they said it absolutely would. I says, what about the local review body then? Would it be the same? He says, it would be the same. So that certainly doesn't seem to happen in practice, but I know like it's quite a few times. So the plan application seems to be taking one philosophy, but the local review body seems to be taking a different approach in quite a number of occasions, going back to other historical cases. So that's why I always draw the line and say, okay, the plan application is dealing with that way, the local review body is dealing with this way. Let's determine this. And again, I suppose just to reflect further, I've seen a planning official, without naming them, some a lot of them are away by now actually, from the council, but they'll interpret a policy in the local development development plan 2, even historically, the old local plans, in a particular way. And you speak to different planning officers, they've got a different view in it, which I think is absolutely just a human element of planning and having that level of discretion. So that's I think MPF 4 policy 17 for me takes precedence in this case. But that's just a personal view, like I say, and taking each case in its own merits and the no-way approach. But Councillor, just because nobody else is coming this, anybody else is, Keith, will you want a view on this?
I don't want to sort of repeat what people have said. You know, I do think it's a bit of a balance. But looking at the three, I think the last point, the development not being suitably scaled, was the thing that really I was concerned about. But having looked at the site, I'm less concerned about that. And to me, it does seem fairly straightforward that it would represent a beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site. You know, so I would sort of disagree with that. And I can understand what our solicitor is saying about LDP2 being the supplementary advice fitting in with MPF4. But there seems to be quite a lot of instances where you'd be just driven down two different routes, and so we have to decide which of those routes we're going to go down. And as I think you've just pointed out, the MPF4 route would say yes to all three of those. You know, so I'd be happy to overturn this.
I'll come back to Councillor Justy, then Thompson. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. So, Chair, just to put a bit more policy onto what I was saying earlier on and why we should overturn this and back this application. I'm looking at policy 9 in MPF 4, and when you read that, it's policy 9A, development proposals that result in a sustainable reuse of a brownfield land, including vacant and derelict land and buildings, whether permanent or temporary, will be supported in determining whether the reuse is sustainable. The biodiversity value of the brownfield land, which is naturalised, should be taken into account. As we've established, this isn't going to naturalise without mechanical intervention. One of the things that I actually noticed was that the roof is of asbestos design. It's made with asbestos. You let that rot away, then it's going to maybe create contaminated land, which is covered in policy 9C, where land is known or suspected to be unstable or contaminated. Development proposals will demonstrate that the land is or can be made safe and suitable for the proposed new use. That's in policy 9 on MPF 4. Let me just go on to policy 17, which will just take me 1 second. And then we go back to policy 17. We'll maybe just go slightly before that on MPF 4, which is the rural homes subtitle, which we have policy principles and policy intent to encourage, promote and facilitate the delivery of more high quality, affordable and sustainable rural homes in the right locations. Policy outcomes, improve choices of homes across tenures so that identified local needs of people, communities in rural and island areas are met. Homes are provided to support sustainable rural communities and are linked to with service provision. I think if you look at the distance between this application and the town, the village of Sandhead, it's got that local route, that local access, that local route. It's going to support the school. It's going to support the GP's practice there. It's going to support the shop. You go further into the actual nitty gritty, which is the policy 17 on the rural homes part of the National Plan Framework 4, and again, you go down the Roman numerals, and this is the way I look at it. It's the checklist. Is the site allocated on LDP on the LDP? No, it's not. But reuse as a brownfield land where you couldn't get it back to naturalisation without mechanical intervention. We've got that. Tick. Reuse a redundant or unused building. Tick. It's an appropriate use of a historic environment. It's not historic, so that's. Let's see. Yeah, Chair, I'm happy to put this through. I think that is a good development. I think it's a good sizing. I don't think the scale of it is intrusive or demonstrably going to affect the character of the area. There's a precedent, if you want to go into precedent, which we don't really do in planning, of a new development just straight across the road and up that hill in a prominent area. I think that we should overturn the officer's decision on this and say that and grant this as a. Sorry, I'm trying to think back to what Stephen said. Stephen said, what Councillor Thompson said.
So I wonder if I'll bring in Councillor Thompson, and then I've asked Robert just to prepare himself. He's got to capture it, and I'll ask Tracy to run past that to make sure that everyone's okay and competent. And I'll give MD who's, just in case they're not absolutely clear and satisfied, but if everybody's in support of it at that time, then we can look to make a decision. If that's okay, Andrew? Yeah. Thank you. Stephen? Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So I suppose I think the reason why I was teasing out the greenfield bit, so I think the scale and massing bit, I think is probably, it seems like for like, just a different shape. Same volume, different shape, arguably. Or close enough anyway for council work. But and then you've got whether or not we're doing it in line with policy, and you could say that given the way we seem to be interpreting it today, it's like, well, it's a beneficial redevelopment of brownfield site in line with, and then you could say, and it's this bit where it's like most of it is in line with H3 because it meets the test of development of brownfield site. If you allow for the agricultural building bit, which I think seems to be sitting more comfortably in NPF 4 rather than LTP 2 supplementary guidance, but I think that's maybe what Laura was trying to sort of say. This is a refinement to that. So it's in line with that. It's only that portion which is out with the brownfield site, which I'm really sort of thinking, how do we address that in the decision? Because effectively that bit's out with policy in a sense, but the overall development, you could say, on balance, it's sort of broadly in line with that. So, and in terms of the scale and mass, and I don't think that's an issue given the size of the original structure that's there. And in terms of the, what was the other one? H3, scale and mass, and H3 is beneficial. Yeah, and it was really just to sort of address each of those, because if none of those reasons exist, then there's no reason to refuse it, if you see what I mean. So, pardon? Yes, in terms of the character, scale and mass, and so, yeah. So I think we've accepted that the reason why it's a derelict building that could probably do addressing is because it is visible. This would be a beneficial improvement to that. The scale, the character of the surrounding area, well, as was pointed out earlier, you've got a big house in the hill, you've got a house down at the bottom of the road. There's no particular thematic character other than it's largely a rural agricultural area, but there are developments there. So it's hard to really say what would fit or wouldn't fit in terms of a house, other than as long as it's sympathetic to its local environment and it's not exceeding the scale and mass of what's there already, and it's a benefit. Then the only bit for me is, how do we address, do we have to say something about by exception, or we include a bit that we have accepted as out with the brownfield site? And I think that's where I'm looking for that guidance.
I think this is a confusion, and it goes back to, and the better way for me to describe is it's the horse and cart. What is first? And I would say, so the Planning Application Committee should be led by the DPA and the LRB, no the other way around. That's my view, and that's my understanding. That's from a legal standpoint of view that would stand. But what we keep getting drawn back into how the plan application determines application. So I think you're right. So the previous decision that's been made is that they've refused it because they felt it did encroach in that. But I've made some, from my again, my feelings is that the pros outweigh the cons in regards to the small encroachment it has. It's not that the whole site's in a green field, it's only a small part of the site just to make it work, round about the access, availability ways, the turning points, and obviously there is, as you've outlined, I wasn't aware of a wee bit of building, just touching on maybe a couple of feet or something goes into that kind of hedge line into the field. But so for me, the LRB is different from the plan application committee, but Robert's got to tell us exactly whether that's the case or no. I don't think you have to justify that personally. But Robert is the independent plan advisor.
Can I just say that I think the same policies still apply?
So it's the interpretation of, like, going back to what I said, I've spoke to one plan officer, no, that complies with policy, or no, it doesn't. A different plan, on the exact same application. So I think we're only human. Again, so we can have different interpretations, but ultimately it'll be a council decision, and that's the way I look at this. But Robert, you can give us advice on this.
Thanks, Chair. There's been a lot of discussion about this, and I'm sure Laura Whitelaw will want to comment on this too, but I would draw your attention to page 294 of your papers, which is the letter from Scottish Government's Chief Planner, Dr Fiona Simpson, dated 8th of February 2023, and that is the part that's entitled Applying MPF4 Policy. So reading this out might help in trying to resolve some of these questions. It says, Section 25 of the 1997 Act requires that decisions are made in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Application of planning judgment to the circumstances of an individual situation remains essential to all decision making, informed by principles of proportionality and reasonableness. Second paragraph says it's important to bear in mind MPF4 must be read and applied as a whole. The intent of each of the 33 policies is set out in MPF4 and can be used to guide decision making. Conflicts between policies are to be expected. Factors for and against development will be weighed up in the balance of planning judgment. And then the next paragraph says it is recognised that it may take some time for planning authorities and stakeholders to get to grips with the MPF4 policies, and in particular the interface with individual LDP policies. As outlined above, in the event of any incompatibility between a provision of MPF4 and a provision of an LDP, whichever of them is the later in date is to prevail. Provisions that are contradictory or in conflict would be likely to be considered incompatible. So what you're looking at is a balanced kind of holistic judgment on that basis. So that would be certainly the guidance I would point you to in that regard. But very much, I think it's obviously a de novo consideration that you're making today, and again, it's a case of each application on its own merits.
I suppose Stephen's particular point was, sorry, if we could just get that as well. So Stephen thinks we need to make a justification in regards to an exception to policy, if I'm hearing Stephen right, in regards to that small piece of land. Taking what you've just read out there, and the different views, do you think in this case we have to make a justification, Robert, or not? If we as a committee, so local review body, if we say, don't look at that, so we see that as being that policy is being interpreted in that way that it's kind of, that's where we can. That's the point I think Stephen's trying to get to the bottom of. Yeah. And I understand, because I've come across that conflict lots of times, sitting in the planning committee and sitting in this, it's slightly different. Robert.
Thanks, Chair. I think, yeah, if I'm picking Councillor Thompson up correct, it's acknowledged that from the plans it is encroaching onto Greenfield, and everybody appears to be accepting that point. So as part of the notes that I've wrote down for Councillor Justice's motion, I think we can address that by acknowledging that there is an encroachment onto Greenfield land, which is against policy, but members are agreeing that the beneficial redevelopment of the brownfield site outweighs that, and that can be incorporated into the decision, if that helps.
And that's perfect. That's all I needed to hear, really. It's just how do we phrase that to acknowledge that, and then also the bit about the scale and mass, and we're saying that we don't really need to address that because we don't feel that it could be interpreted another way with the same policies. Yeah. Okay.
So that's it. So Laura, you're wanting to come in, Laura?
Thank you, Chair. It was a couple of points on the point of the local review body and the planning application committee. As I'm sure you'll appreciate, the local review body under the regulations which govern it state that it is a committee of the planning authority. So it's almost like a subset of the planning application committee. So it's not really appropriate for the planning application committee and the local review body to interpret policy differently. Whereas, as you're quite rightly say, each case is looked at of new and in its own merits. The actual way in which the policy is applied should be uniform to those in particular cases, which could result in different results. But our approach to the policy should be the same across the two committees. And certainly the Planning Application Committee has been advised on houses in the countryside that rather than see it as being a conflict between H3 and NPF 4, Policy 17, that it should be seen as a local refinement on the definition of brownfield, and that there is no conflict in Dumfries and Galloway Council having brownfield site as not including agricultural buildings.
Okay, thanks for that, Laura. So I'll come back to Andrew if you get any further to say. But you've got a proposal. We'll see if Robert's got anything else to add. Anything else to add? And Tracy, if you can capture that, and then that'll be the decision. Andrew? Oh, sorry, Maureen.
No, it's fine.
I didn't see.
Listening. I'm sort of thinking about this brownfield site, and I can't really see a problem, and I agree with Councillor Carruthers there that that part of the field in agricultural terms is just not really practical when you're working with animals, because I noticed that the access out of that field is at that marginal line there, so it'd be much easier working with animals to just keep them to that line. So in that respect, I don't really see that losing that bit of agricultural land is going to be a huge thing. But my other sort of thing, I'm looking at the overlay of the plan here on page 304, and you've got that within there. And my thought was, why can't you just move your planning more into the greenfield site so that you're not moving the whole thing over into the applicant's area, the greenfield site, that's actually been asked for the change of use on that land, and just move the whole planning over into that piece of ground.
So I'll ask Robert to touch on that, but I
Because
understand...
this was a planning in principle.
No, it's full.
It's full planning, yeah. And you can move it so that you're not having to use that piece of agricultural land, but move it into the actual site.
So I'll ask Robert to cover that, but my understanding from...
It's just, just a technical one. I was just...
if
there is an answer to that.
From the site visit, I think it's in two parts, but Robert will answer it properly, is that you've got to consider each case in its own merit. So what's presented, you've got to consider it as is. And the visibility displays and the access was mentioned. And I get the distances from... I think that had something to do with it, but Robert?
Thanks, Chair. I'm happy to clarify if I can just share what I've got on my screen at the moment. Bear with me. It's going back to the picture that you've mentioned, which should be up on your screen just now. So for the avoidance of doubt, photograph 7, this has been supplied by the case officer who dealt with the planning application under delegated powers, and that's the aerial view of the site confirming the existing cartilage in their view, like we said. So that's the existing building and the associated paddock that's enclosed. So that's kind of that unit, if you like. The image below, what you've got the same dotted red line in relation to the original building, but superimposed in that, you've got the red line of the application site. Now, in the event, you're obviously determining the case here, in the event that obtained planning permission, that would then become the curtilage of the dwelling house, and you would expect an enclosure round about it. In terms of consideration of the case, what you're looking at is the application that's been made and determined under delegated powers. So you're looking at the case on its merits as it's been submitted. So you're considering what's in front of you today, basically. It could be amended, but that would require a further planning application. As far as the other points go, I think the only thing I was going to say in relation to reasons, it's entirely within the gift of the LRB, and I think the key thing is in making a decision that departs from policy is making it clear what the reasons were.
Go on, Stephen. Yep.
So So embedded in the original application is effectively that change of use from agricultural land, so that, and that extends beyond what's the brownfield site to the wee bit that's been proposed. Yeah, so that would kind of be captured in that anyway. Yeah, okay, thank you.
So, and what we're having to discuss here is conditions, so we'll have to depend subject to. Andrew?
So, Chair, I'm not going to add too much onto this. I was quite happy with what Tracy had added to what the proposal was. I think that she's copied it down and captured what I was trying to say. I think that we are within policy here. I don't think we're going away from policy. As I said, on balance, I'm happy to stand by the motion that we are lay members of the community who have been elected as councillors and put onto committees such as this. And it's when you consider the fact that we need to look at supplementary guidance, we have to look at guidance notes, MPF4 and the MPF, sorry, the other LRB, not LRB, LDP. We've got all these documents to go through. We're lay people. We don't have that technical understanding of this. And when we are given documents such as what was read out earlier on by Robert, which says that we need to take the most recent document and the most recent policy document in our arsenal, we have to take that as our precedent and our main focus. We don't need to depart off of MPF4. That, to me, is our plan policy. And this idea of it's a refinement, looking back at the policy that was written in 2018, well, we've got it from the Minister's office and the Scottish Government. We've been told MPF4 is what you use. That's your document, that's your guidance. So the idea of refining, I struggle with that because, as I said, we are lay people. We're not here, we've not went to university to study the nuances of planning. We're here to interpret these policies that's been given to us by the Scottish Government. And that's what I see myself doing.
Thanks for that, Andrew. Councillor Thompson, then, I definitely got the decision after that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, it was really just to second you on the basis of how Tracy had sort of outlined it, because I think that helped just capture it in its simplest form, maybe. And I would say that, yeah, we have to take reasonable decisions as any reasonable person on the street, because that's what we are, we're just lay people. But I think I'm always happier when we've satisfied ourselves and we've had the advice from people who have gone to university and studied things, because it's like, well, at least we've got the advice, and even based on that and our reasonable approach to that, we can at least say, well, we've considered all this, and in the round we think that on balance, Tracy's captured the wording. And I think that's, you know, we have to respect all the different people that have contributed towards us being able to make a decision. So, yeah, thank you.
No, I agree with that entirely. We should always have that discussion and make it absolutely clear why you're making that decision. Robert, just before I go to Tracy, have you got anything else you'd like to add at this moment in time? I'll come back to you, but once Tracy's outlined, I'll come back to you about conditions, because they have to be added in. Tracy, do you just want to remind us what the competent motion was?
Thanks, Chair. So I've got down from my notes, just correct me, Councillor, just if I'm wrong, is members would like to reverse the decision of the appointed officer and approve the application, as this proposal is a beneficial redevelopment of a brownfield site which has not or will not happen without intervention, complying with LDP policy H3 and National Planning Framework 4 policies 9 and 17, whilst acknowledging the encroachment onto greenfield land, which in this case is outweighed by the beneficial redevelopment of a derelict brownfield site, and that the design of the proposal would not be visually or environmentally intrusive and would fit in well with the surrounding area, which could comply with LDP2, policy OP2 and supplementary guidance.
I'm happy with that, Tracy, thank you.
I would say that, Councillor Thompson. So we've got to move in a second. We haven't got any counters, but before we make that final decision, we'll just talk about conditions now. We'll talk about timelines, maybe road conditions, stuff like that. But Robert?
Thanks, Chair. I've had a look through the papers before the meeting, obviously, and tried to prepare for this situation if it arose. Now, I would suggest that as a standard thing, this is a full planning application, you would impose a condition requiring the development be commenced within 3 years of the date of the planning permission, which is fairly standard. And I think the reason for that is to comply with Section 58 of the Town and Country Planning Act, but I'll double check that before any decision goes out, because I don't trust myself with that. There's an archaeological condition recommended in the Council Landscape Architects consultation response. That's on pages 360 to 361 of your papers. I don't see any reason to not put that on the decision, but that's within your gift as well. There's also 9 additional roads conditions set out in that separate consultation response, which I think's pages 197 to 198, and directives as well. I'll actually come back to the archaeology one because I'm not sure if that's the right page number for it. The fourth thing is the condition requiring finishes to be agreed. Is that something you would like to see imposed upon it, which would then be agreed with officers under delegated powers? Do you think that's necessary or not in this circumstance? And the only other really thing I thought of was, would you want a condition seeking boundary treatment to be submitted and agreed, for example, something like hawthorn hedging or something like that in that area? And again, that's something that would be agreed with officers under delegated powers. So, yeah, I'm happy to be guided by you, but certainly in terms of the conditions, those are the kind of total of 13 that I would suggest you might want to consider. I'll come back about the page numbers for the archaeology consultation response as well, Chair.
See the archaeological one, is that a watching brief, I take it, that type of condition?
Yes, it is, Chair. I just need to make sure that it's the correct one for this case, though, because I think the page numbers are wrong.
Okay. So members, for those of us that have been on that type of site, that's just quite often a standard condition, sometimes onerous, but it's where there's been, well, it's a Roman settlement, but historical involvement supposedly in that site in the past, where you'd engage an archaeologist to come in whenever you went to start digging. They'd be there to see if there's anything there. And if anything was discovered, it would be monitored and so on and so forth. But Robert will come back to that, I'm sure. In regards to the enclosures, stroke hedge lines and such like boundaries, what do the members think in regards to that? You've got a lot of detail, and I'll cover that one first. I'll try and cover it when Robert's. We'll try and do this multitask because I know people want to move on. So I'm looking at moving the second one in particular. Come to you first, Andrews. Move out.
I was quite happy to accept all of Robert's conditions. That they seem reasonable.
Right.
Often we put in a directive about lighting and things like that, just in terms of so that, you know, but that's probably sort of can be captured. And then obviously we know within the application that's proposed, it's talking about air source heat pump and solar panels, and I know we're keen to promote sustainable and renewable energy efficient buildings, so I think that's within the application anyway. So that's fine. The only other thing was, I did wonder about as it is just now, it's a bit of agricultural land with an access from the road, and then there's an access into a field. And I just wondered, is there any particular right of access that, and again, this is maybe down to things like that, and I don't know if a hawthorn hedge would be an impediment to that, but if there's a way that if there is access needed, that there can be an appropriate space in the hedge or whatever, but that's maybe down to the landowner and any access traditions. But beyond that, happy with what you suggested.
Okay, Robert?
Yeah, that seems fine. In terms of the hedge, if you were minded to go with that condition, that would be for the applicant to submit for agreement in writing, so it could accommodate things like field access that was required and wouldn't give an impediment. The other thing I'd mentioned about the recommended archaeological condition, that relates to the next item on the agenda, so I've got my wires crossed with that one. There isn't actually any need for that condition, so that should be struck off, certainly in relation to this case.
Strike that. Roads conditions at all, visibility displays one thing, it's usually standard, but maybe not needed because it's existing, I'm not sure.
I think that all those conditions are embodied in the road response that's in your papers. Right. So there's no difficulty there, and those are the conditions. They're in code, but they are the ones that appear in your papers on pages 197 and 198. The archaeological condition, like I say, relates to the next item on the agenda, so yeah, should be discarded.
Excellent, thank you. Happy with that, members? Yeah. Excellent, Tracy, you've got that, haven't you? Item number 6, members, thank you very much. That's excellent. Do we need a quick comfort break or not? Are we all right just to hammer on? We're all right to hammer on. Item number 6. We'll go through the same process as last time, which I think we got Robert to go through the slides first, was it? In regards to site visit, have any questions in regards to that? Tracy will outline and tell us where we were again. Thank you very much. Tell us where we were, and we'll go right into debate after that. Thanks very much. Thank you. Robert?
Thanks, Chair. What I'm about to show replicates what's in your papers on pages 525 to 528. So I'll just go through the same process and just share my screen.
like for like the day, wasn't it? When you
Yeah,
said that?
very similar weather conditions. So the first view is a view of the application site, and this is looking more towards the kind of southeast. This is behind the stone dikes, so the application site is there in the foreground. This is a view looking southwest, showing the site of the new access road. And there was a question about that during the site visit. And the application site is to the left behind that stone dike that you see. So this is kind of in the opposite view to the viewpoint we were at earlier. This is a view of the site of the proposed access road looking west, which is linking to the existing route down to the shore at Moss Yard. This is a view looking west, showing the site of the former quarry located to the south of the application site. So you've got that visible rock wall that we observed earlier, just on your right-hand side in the foreground. And this is a view of the former quarry site looking east. So you can see that small tree that was visible and that kind of characteristic rock face there. It's possibly been more recently active than I had appreciated when we were out in sight, because that doesn't seem to be that historic, that use. It seems to be fairly recent. There's a view of the application site here, and this is looking towards the southeast, so more towards Sandgreen, which was the first viewpoint today. And this is a view looking south, showing the application site with Moss Yard in the distance, and the islands of Fleet there as well, just above. And this is a view looking north. It's from the access road, and this is looking towards Lagan. So you've got Gigi's Yard there, and you have the Snugs at Lagan there, and on your left-hand side, you've got the Gather restaurant. So in summary, again, similar to the previous case, Councillors Carruthers, Justy, Howie, Johnson, Thompson, Walters, and myself as Independent Planning Advisor, and Tracy Sonko as Committee Clerk, met on the viewpoint site at Sandgreen just after 10:30 this morning. The applicant wasn't present, nor was their agent. We looked at a variety of viewpoints for the site, and I was conscious when we did that that you had a submitted design statement, and you have various pictures within that on pages 406 to 415. So those were shared during the site visit with the members. We looked across from Sandgreen to the application site, and we observed that in the context of the surrounding development, particularly the sites at Auchenlady, the sites at Moss Yard, and the other application site. The other thing that we looked at was we moved around. We were conscious of viewpoint 1 in the design and access statement, which was from the A75 towards the application site, but there wasn't a safe place to stop there. So we proceeded then to the minor public road which accesses down towards the existing Moss Yard development, and from which the access route would be taken. We considered whether or not to actually look at the viewpoint set out just beneath the summit of Ben John from above Lagan, but we didn't think it was safe to get up there because the conditions were very slippery. So we finished up broadly about, I think it was about 11:15 when we finished up, and then we reconvened later at the site at Sandhead. Again, the procedure note was sent out late December, and that explained the reasoning behind why the members wanted the site visit to take place.
Thanks so much for that, Robert. Any members got any questions at this moment in time on that particular site visit and the shots we've just seen? No, Tracy, come to you if that's okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just remind members of the reasons for refusal, which are on page 488 in your papers. As a result of the siting of the proposed development, it would fail to complement the natural environment and would have a significant unacceptable landscape and visual impact within the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area and the Galloway Hill Regional Scenic Area. such that it would jeopardise the scenic landscape contrary to MPF 4 policies 4 and 30, Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan 2 policies OP1, OP2, ED9, NE1 and NE2, and associated supplementary guidance on design quality and placemaking and the planning guidance, Fleet Valley National Scenic Area Management Strategy. So the main issues for the local review body to consider is, by reason of its siting, would the proposed development fail to complement the natural environment? As a result of its siting, would the proposed development have a significant unacceptable landscape and visual impact within the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area and the Galloway Hill Regional Scenic Area, such that the scenic landscape would be jeopardised? On the basis that the proposal would fail to accord with the terms of LTP2 policies OP1, OP2, ED9, NE1 and NE2 and supplementary guidance, does the proposal accord with the terms of MPF 4 policies 4, 7, 14 and 30 insofar as the landscape and visual impact arising from the proposal by reasons of proposed siting being concerned? How much weight would members wish to attach to the local review body decision taken in relation to Planning Permission 22/0313 FUL at court now? How much weight would members wish to attach to local review body decision taken in relation to Planning Permission 22/0368 FUL at the same location as the proposal? And if members conclude that the proposal is contrary to the terms of the development plan, are there other material considerations which would justify a decision which would represent a departure from the terms of the development plan, and if so, on what grounds should such a decision be made? If members are minded to not uphold the appointed officer's decision and grant planning permission for the proposal, what set of conditions and reasons would members wish to see attached, if any? If members are minded to vary the appointed officer's decision and make explicit reference to MPF 4 in the decision notice, what changes to the specific reasoning for the decision would be required? And again, members are able to have the full powers to uphold, reverse or vary a determination, and the decision notice will include a statement of the terms in which the planning authority has decided the case reviewed today. You still have your independent planning advisor present and our solicitor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. So members, I'll just a quick one. I'll come to Justy, Andrew.
Thanks, Chair. So, Chair, it's just again on the delegated report, and I'm on the reasons. And within the reasons, I've got one question for for Robert Duncan, and that's MPF 4 Policy 30. Now, when you look at MPF 4 Policy 30, there's not enough script in this reason for me to be able to take MPF 4 Policy 30 and see what the officer's trying to say here and how it's contrary. Because MPF 4 Policy 30 doesn't mention anything about the natural environment or anything like that. The only thing that it does mention is proposals for huts will be supported where the nature and scale of the development is compatible with the surrounding area, and proposal complies with relative good practice guidance. Other than that, there's not a huge amount there that I can see where MPF 430 actually comes into play. Could Robert give us a wee bit more information or a wee bit more clarity on that, please?
Robert, thank you.
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, my first port of call on that is this is obviously a report that's been prepared by the case officer, and then it's been approved by the council's appointed officer for this. So my first port of call, rather than MPF 430, is to look firstly at the delegated report, which I'm just looking for just now, and then secondly to look at the appointed officer comments to see what's mentioned in relation to that policy. I mean, clearly there's a reason there which references it, but I'm really looking to find what's in the body of the report, if you like, section 4 of the delegated report. So that is the section that starts on page 343. So I'm just quickly looking through this just now, and you're looking at paragraph 4.4, which looks at the principle of it, and it does discuss MPF 4 policy 30 there. So that's not the part that's really helping in relation to trying to understand the use of it. I'm just going down the paragraphs here.
It looks like it's saying that local policies ED2 and ED8 are taking precedence to NPF 4. That's how it's being interpreted, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you're saying that, Robert.
Yeah, I mean, I don't actually see any direct reference to MPF 4 policy 30 within the body of the report when it's actually looking at considering the practical impacts from the designs proposed. It does mention the principle of it and so on. The next thing I would look at would be the appointed officer comments, because that will often give clarity to or fill in a gap that's maybe not in the delegated report, or it will amplify something that's in that report. So that appears on pages 375, 376 and 377. But again, there doesn't really seem to be any direct mention in relation to MPF 4 policy 30 apart from paragraph 1.7 where it's featured in the wording of the decision. So I'm not really able to shed much more light on that, I'm afraid.
Thanks for that, Mr Duncan. So, Chair, if we do uphold the officer's recommendations in this one, I'm not putting anything forward here, but if the committee does, can we make sure that we remove MPF 4 policy 30 as it's not relevant in this refusal?
Thanks, Chair. That would be varying, if members decided, that would be varying the decision of the appointed officer, and then the reason for refusal would be reworded.
Councillor Howie, Ian?
It's where I usually come in these things, Chair, not going so much on policy, but just disagreeing with the opinion of the case officer that this would be visually unobtrusive and basically an eyesore. And well, I disagree with the other buildings that are far more prominent in that area. You're just, I imagine, you're about 300 yards away from Auchenleary holiday site, probably the biggest caravan site in southwest Scotland, and these are comparatively compact buildings well set within the surroundings of the quarry, and I do not agree that it is visually unacceptable in this view.
Okay, thanks very much. My comments would be that looking at it from the site visits, looking at it in the way they would, the pictures we've got here, but the way they fitted into the hill, I was comfortable enough with taking into consideration what was already there, and how that had settled in. The restaurant in particular, it looks very boxy, but actually it works. Okay, when you see it from that distance, for me it works. For this to be slightly to the right and lower to that, with the old quarry being there, you can see how that material's been overspilled, come at the front. You've still got that natural spillage there. I just didn't see. For me, I could accept it as if it was to be overturned. But I mean, I was quite content. I was in balance. I wasn't content. I was in balance either way. In regards to, I wasn't unhappy the fact that it had been refused. But there's a number of the reasons why I think it could have been approved as well. Whether it's economics, whether it's new over-imposing in regards to, like Councillor Howes just outlined, in regards to the effect it has in that local area. So the visual effect in particular, the visual impact. But Councillor Howley and I said something called just the MDLs. Councillor Thompson, Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I'm just looking at 4.13 where it's talking about the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area Management Strategy, and I accept that unsympathetic tourist development can have a detrimental, but these aren't, all developments will have, and I think what we've been presented with in terms of considering is a very small and what looks like sympathetic colouring schemes of small chalets, which are very commonplace, which would likely be more sympathetic as proposed than some of the things that are very obvious whenever we're actually on the site visit, as Councillor Howe was kind of saying. So I'm not convinced that that it's just because there's a development there that it's necessarily unsympathetic for that consideration. I'm just sort of wondering. I'm actually thinking more about if we were allowed to sort of overturn this or support this, would we have to consider things like temporary permissions, given the nature of caravans or chalets or whatever, but maybe that's a wee bit ahead of the game just now. So I'm just sort of thinking about the practical applications of that. But Robert, I don't know if that's something you've prepared earlier.
Thanks, Chair. If I can comment, I have given some thought to the prospect of conditions in the event that you take an alternative decision to the one that's been made by the appointed officer of the council, and that's fairly commonplace for these types of applications at these meetings, so I'm not totally flat-footed in that scenario, but be quite happy to discuss it at the appropriate point. Yeah.
Just ready to agree, having been on the site visit and having looked at the different viewpoints, I don't really agree that it would have a significant and unacceptable landscape and visual impact, because the way they've talked about the way they're going to build them, and the way you look at it from the different viewpoints, it's going to fit in with what's already there anyway. I don't see that.
Maureen, you want a comment? No. No, you're okay. Okay, just. So, Tracy, I'll just ask you to capture what's been said up to now, because there's obviously a feeling towards supporting it, and we'll come back to you with some more questions, I think, Robert, in regards to... I've got some questions in regards to the reasons for refusal in particular. Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. What I'm hearing is that members are perhaps inclined to support in the proposal and reversing the decision of the appointed officer and approve planning permission, as the proposal would not have a significant unacceptable landscape and visual impact within the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area and the Galloway Hills Regional Scenic Area, and that the scenic landscape would not be jeopardised and the development would not be contrary to MPF 4, Policy 4, or Dumfries and Galloway Council Local Development Plan 2, Policies OP1, OP2, ED9, NE1 and NE2, or associated supplementary guidance on design, quality and placemaking or planning framework, and the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area Management Strategy.
Was it 4 and 30 when MPF 4?
I thought because Robert had outlined earlier, I couldn't see any other relation to 30. I just took that out and left it as Policy 4, but I can add 30 back in if members wish that to be as it was refused.
The only reason, I think the reason I say that is because when Councillor Justy came in, I think unless I picked it up wrong, you felt it wasn't a conflict with MPF 4, Policy 30, I think it was.
My reading, Chair, if you let me in, is I don't see any conflict with MPF 4 Policy 30. There's nothing in the Policy 30 that conflicts with this. If anything, it would support it. And I'll just flick back to Policy 30, where it actually has a designation for what we've got here, which is huts or lodges of sorts. Let's see. Proposals for hut, so this is MPF 4 Policy 30D. Proposals for huts will be supported where nature and scale of the development is compatible with the surrounding area, and the proposal complies with relevant good practice guidance. The surrounding area is you've got green caravans on the hillside that are more environmentally detrimental than what these would be. They seem to be of a wooden construct, if I'm right, Robert, and probably quite neutral in blending into the landscape. From one of the viewpoints we had across the water, you can see quite brightly the mint-coloured caravans, which I would say are a larger impact on the visibility and on the scenic area. So, on balance, I would say that MPF 4 Policy 30 supports it. Its policy intent to encourage, promote and facilitate sustainable tourism development which benefits local people. It's consistent with our net zero and nature commitments and inspires people to visit Scotland. Policy outcomes, communities and places enjoy economic, social and cultural benefits from tourism, supporting resilience and stimulating job creation. Well, we already know that just across the road from this site, we've got a restaurant that's had to stop being a restaurant and just focusing entirely on a wedding venue because it's not getting enough footfall. And I think that's where Policy 30 actually supports this. We need people in here. We need to be a viable a viable tourist economy to generate wealth in Dumfries and Galloway. And I don't see this as I don't see Policy 30 as a reason for refusal, if I'm being honest.
Tracy?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So if we go down the route of it being approved, then I would include 30 then, because we're saying that it's not contrary to policy. So yeah, I would keep 30 in. Sorry, Chair.
No, that's fine. That's what I thought, because you mentioned that earlier. Robert, have you any further comments, Robert?
It was just in relation to design and finishes. If it's helpful to members, your best plan is probably on page 399. So you've got 3 units of that type of design. For external materials, the roof would be corrugated galvanised steel sheeting with polyester powder coating in dark grey. The walls would be vertical timber, which would gradually fade to kind of silver grey colour, and your windows and doors would be dark grey UPVC. So that's what you're looking at. And again, as far as conditions go, if you're wanting advice on conditions, again, I'm quite happy to provide that.
Just give us a minute, Robert, thanks.
I think looking at this, obviously given the nature of the application, you're looking at tourism development, so I think there should be a condition on which limits occupancy of these units to limit it to tourist accommodation. Otherwise there's a risk these could be inadvertently used as dwelling houses, if you like, which isn't how the application has been assessed, nor is the intention of your decision. In terms of the duration of the permission, I'm conscious that these are fairly temporary type units that would probably meet the definition of a caravan. I therefore kind of wondered, and this is obviously for yourselves to consider, would a temporary permission for 20 years be appropriate, recognising these are non-permanent? My concern there was if they got a permanent open-ended permission, would there be a point at which they would kind of fade into a poor condition, at which point, given the location in the national scenic area, would you be wanting them removed? So I wondered if maybe a 20-year temporary permission with a requirement for the units to be removed from the site at the end of that period and the site reinstated, would that be appropriate? Again, there'd be nothing to stop the applicant coming back with a fresh application. The only thing I wondered about was the time span, because I didn't want a 20-year temporary permission to kind of limit the viability of the proposal from their perspective. And I did toy with a shorter period, but I thought maybe 20 was right for that. But it's within your gift. That was the thinking behind that one. The other one was just really if you wanted a condition on design and finishes of each unit to be agreed in writing prior to their siting at this location, notwithstanding what you've got in front of you. Would you want any further requirements here, or are you happy enough with what you've got, or would you rather that was agreed and that would be done by officers under delegated powers? And then going ahead to the roads planning requirements, the consultation responses in your papers, page 355 to 356, and there's 8 conditions there. I don't have any difficulty with any of them, so that was what I was thinking in relation to conditions, Chair. Archaeology, yeah, that's a good point. The archaeology condition I mentioned in relation to the previous one actually relates to this one, and it's at the same place in the papers, which I think was page 355 to 356, and that was the watch and brief condition. So yeah, that would be on as well. Thanks for the reminder, Chair.
Okay, Councillor Walters.
Yeah, the only query I'd have about the conditions is this 20-year thing. Are we looking at these as if they are caravans or temporary? And if we do put this condition on, are we sort of making an assumption about the type of accommodation that's being created there, which doesn't seem to be in the application? The application doesn't, as far as I can see from what the applications are, they are lodges. Or is there a definition somewhere that says these are not lodges, these are caravans, therefore they should be treated as temporary? Because otherwise putting a 20-year sort of condition on seems to be a bit restrictive to me. That's my first instinct.
There is a definition of what a caravan is in planning terms, and it's set out in the 1960 Caravans Act and the 1968 Caravans Act. But there's basically a multitude of things, like the twin lodge units you popularly get now, which look like chalets, technically meet the definition of caravan. And because they meet the definition of caravan, you will need a planning permission to site them on land, but you don't always have control over what they look like. So in other words, once you obtain your planning permission to site a caravan somewhere, as long as what you cite there meets that definition of caravan, then it's kind of open-ended, which is why I was maybe suggesting, given the sensitivity of this location, you maybe want something where you've got control over design and finishes. The 20-year thing was just the best guess in terms of how it would weather. It is, you know, I don't know what it's going to look like in 20 years' time, but I was concerned by the prospect of just leaving something open-ended that could be left there to rot in the longer term, if you like. But whether or not that's reasonable is a different kettle of fish. It was just a thought. I didn't want to leave it completely open-ended at that location. I mean, if you got to 20 years' time and they were weathering great, then they'd probably be able to make another application and secure that quite easily, I would have thought.
It's, I suppose just before you come in, Stephen, are you wanting in as well, Ian? No. It's the business case probably does stack up. I haven't got that in from again. 20 years probably wash its face quite comfortably in regards to the investment into the units, the construction, the installation, all the rest of it. But it's 20, I suppose that's the only thing that's outlying for me. So leave that in the back of your mind, Councillor Thompson, Stephen. We'll come back to you with that.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, so I suppose my main concern was I'm sympathetic to development going ahead here, given the scale and nature of it in terms of what's proposed, but the longevity of it, they are caravans. You know, I don't know what the lifespan of a lodge is if you didn't look after it, or if you did, you know, and who knows, because once you've got the permission, if it's not overseen by anything, then you could, as Robert said, and I think that was one of the concerns, is 20 years the right figure? It seems reasonable, but I mean, I don't know what the going rate is. Normally we've given temporary caravans 3 years and stuff like that, but I think given the case, all business cases look great at the start, but after you reflect on them a bit, 10 years later you're going, that business case didn't stack up, did it? But anyway, and we can think of local examples for that anyway, right? But I'm comfortable with what Robert's suggesting. I think it's in the dark sky transition zone, I think, whatever it is. So I think if there's a direction on that, that'd be helpful. And also the no primary residence bit. And if we do allow it to go ahead, to make the point to the council tax team to say, by the way, this is no primary residence, because sometimes we agree at planning, but it doesn't get across to that desk in council tax, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of comfortable with that, and comfortable with, given that it is a national scenic, a regional scenic area, etc., then having that extra assurance that the finish is agreed in writing, so there's something to hold somebody to, and also that it's it can be renewed in 20 years' time rather than just an open-ended thing where there's it avoids the risk of dereliction, I think, and we've already had a discussion about derelict buildings and we don't want those, so I'm happy to go with something along. I don't know if 20 years is the right number, but it seems reasonable, but thank you.
Keith?
Sorry, I'm perhaps learning something today, but I didn't think that when we've passed these type of properties before, I hadn't noticed that sort of condition had been included, because there's been a few of these around various places, you know, in my ward as well. And if we're now going to be saying this fits into the technical version of a technical definition of a caravan, and therefore we should be saying that, I'm just surprised. I'm willing to be, you know, educated on this. I'm just a bit surprised. It just seems quite a restriction for a business to be told that they're putting something in. They're building a building, but they're being told that in 20 years they're going to have to take their building down, or they're going to have to come back to planning and argue their case.
Quick question to Robert, and just on the back of what you're saying, so for the sake of consistency of approach across the piece, I'm the same mind as what Keith's saying there. I had in mind attaching this type of condition unless it's in exceptional circumstances. Sounds like you're saying because it's a regional scenic area. But imagine I'm looking myself, because it looks like it's got to get support, but if I was investing a couple of $100,000 into that, building it and thinking I've got to make that work within the next 20 years, and I've got no idea as a committee member here looking to make a decision. Is that got to stack up in 20 years? Has it got to be a 30? Is it a 50-year business case? I have no idea. Is that 5 year? Honestly, I have no idea. So I'm like Keith. I've got that, Ken. So if it's an inconsistent approach, I'll probably veer on the side of caution and say, right, okay, let's just stay away with that condition altogether. Which is, they've got the permission. Because there's a number of different routes in which when a building becomes derelict and destitute, which the council can approach, whether it's building standards, whether it's the planning and enforcement and such like. So, but Robert, I would like your thoughts on that then. And is it on the same point, Stephen? No, I'll let Stephen in first, and then you can capture them, everybody's.
So, I mean, I know historically we've not been great at this, but I think we could have been and should have been better. And if not, if we can't do it yesterday, we might as well do it today. Do you know what I mean? So I think there is something about the sense. I think we recognise it as a regional scenic area, and that has some status. And if we did take that approach to preemptively care about our environment and what we allow to be constructed, then I think it's probably reasonable to put some kind of limit on temporary structures, because whatever way you cut it, it's still a caravan. It'll get towed in a lorry and put there. Do you know what I mean? So it's or built from a kit. So it's not a permanent dwelling. And even if you have to come back in 20 years' time and say, can we just renew that? And a lot of businesses do this, whether it's they'll renew a license or renew an application. You might say it's like for like, we're just renewing it. We've still got that element of, in a regional scenic area, we know that the finish and standard of those buildings is going to be, the temporary structures is going to be to the standard that this body feels is appropriate. So I think, and we should probably take a more careful approach with that in future, I would suggest, because we've already had issues with caravans being an issue in terms of people being turfed out of caravan parks because it's a permanent residence, and even though the condition was there. So I think we're missing, there's gaps where developments without the right weight of oversight on them can end up being a risk to the region and a burden to the council if they do become derelict. It's us that shoulders the cost. Do you know what I mean? So I'd be comfortable to go ahead with something like that. 20 years might not be the... I'd be happy to go with 20 years if that's what it puts down, because it seems like a reasonable time to turn a business return. That's my view, and I would move that if it had to.
Give us your thoughts, Robert, then I'll come back to yourself, Keith.
I mean, I should point out, my day-to-day job these days does not include looking at tourism applications. I don't know if it is consistent with approach elsewhere within the council. I should say that first. It just occurred to me on the site, because it was so scenic, one of the advantages of the proposal, if you like, was it didn't really have much of a permanent footprint. It was reversible. But then at the same time, I recognise that, if you didn't put a kind of time limit on it, a temporary time limit, then you could end up with these things being there for a very long time, at which time they might have become obsolete. They might become an eyesore in this sensitive location, which to me would seem regrettable, given you've got a great opportunity to have them taken away at the end of their useful life. The 20-year period is a guess. I mean, I'm not an expert in caravans and how long they're going to be financially viable for, but it does occur to me if the applicant wasn't comfortable with that time period, they could come along with a Section 42 application to change that condition, or they could actually undertake further process in relation to this application. So there is a remedy for them, and it wouldn't be too burdensome for that. If they came back and said, well, look, 20 years isn't viable, it needs to be 25 or 30 years or whatever, then we could look at it again. But it was just to really try and ensure that in due course it was reversible. So say in 20 years' time you could take these units away, or in fact they might wear better than what you thought. So in 20 years' time you might think, well, fine, they can stay there for another 10 years. It was just really to try and give some control over it rather than just an open-ended permission in a sensitive location. So that was just the logic behind it.
So understand that. So just tell the committee, because some of us are aware what Section 42 is and some of us aren't. Yep.
It's basically where you make an application for planning permission for something that has already been given in the past, but you're seeking a new permission which isn't in compliance with the terms of the previous conditions. So you're changing the wording of one or two conditions. So what you're basically doing is cloning the earlier planning permission, but you're changing a couple of aspects about the conditions typically with it, and then that becomes the permission that you use. It's become fairly popular with planning applications for wind farms, where they've had a 25-year permission basically to begin with, because they've told councils that these turbines will last 25 years and then they need to be removed, and they're actually finding out they're lasting longer. So what they're doing then is coming in, and effectively what they're doing is granting themselves a new permission but with a different condition, which maybe gives them 30 or 35 years. And you could certainly do that in a case like this. It's a flat rate fee to make an application like that, so it's not something unduly burdensome. It's not like they're going to have to submit an entirely fresh application if that's what they end up doing.
So I'll give you my thoughts, and Keith, just before I bring you back in, is, so if there was to be a timeline, and Councillor Thompson's insistent on it, There's a I'll definitely touch on that. So I think 20 years isn't enough, and I think 30 years is more appropriate. I'll tell you why, because we have a lot of time. We have different organisations, charitable in particular, but if they're trying to get a grant or a subsidy, whatever it may be, towards a particular building, if they didn't own it, they have to have at least 25, 30 years, ideally minimum 20, but ideally 25 plus. So it's in private hands at the moment. It could end up anywhere, but it could be subject to grant application. It might not be. Usually that criteria is there. So I would rather see extended to 30 if that was the case. So we didn't jeopardise any potential business cases that might be there. And secondly, you've got the Section 42 approach, which is a common practice, and Robert's already spoken about that, was give them a fresh application permission at that time. It would just be the change of that condition, I would imagine, take away the timeline. But Keith, back to you.
Yeah, I accept what you're saying. I didn't think this would lead the point really. Yeah, as long as we are being consistent, I suppose, and if, as Councillor Thompson says, we are doing this because it is in a national scenic thing, because then what we don't seem to be saying is because it is defined as a caravan, we should then be applying these conditions to any other applications that we get. I think I would be happy if we agreed it at 30 years, and then the applicant could come back if 30 years seems better to me than 20. I'd be happy with that.
I'll always use these, I think, committees the best we can as a learning point, because going back to what Councillor just said earlier, we're only lay people, so going back to the tests, Robert, then, just as a final, the tests of a condition, the appropriateness, so on and so forth, do you think it would pass it quite comfortably or not?
I think it would. The one I'm struggling with is obviously reasonableness. Is it reasonable or not? And that's down to the time scale. I think it's necessary. I think I could word it in a way that was precise and enforceable, and it's relevant to planning, and it's relevant to the case here. So like I said, the only one I've been kind of chewing over about it is it reasonable or not? And, you know, we do it with wind turbines. They're a very different thing. You give them a certain duration of planning permission because you don't want them sitting up there forever more. So there's some kind of means of getting rid of them. I suspect this isn't a consistent approach, if you like, in the sense I don't think it will have been done before like this. But there usually is something in place to try and get things like this removed when they're no longer required, or they serve their purpose rather than have them sitting around. And like I say, we've done that with all scales of wind turbines for a long time. The only other thing I would say is, you know, we might all be retired in 30 years' time as well.
Laura, I know you'll be listening away in the background, all going well, and hopefully been listening to this debate. So give us your thoughts, please. And I think it's an interesting point.
It's a very interesting point, and it's one which, you know, driving around about the region, you often think when you see certain developments, you think, why is it that we give wind farms a time-limited condition and other ones we don't? I think I agree with what Robert says. I think it is within the tests, within the circular. I think it is defensible. That doesn't mean that the developer won't try and challenge it, but I think it is defensible to have a condition on the time.
Thanks so much for that. So if we can extend that to 30 years, you okay with that, Stephen, Councillor Thompson?
Yeah, I was going to say I'll go halfway, 25. But I mean, in principle, I don't really mind, because it might be that that's appropriate. I'm sure 20, 25, 30 is significant, or is enough to say, I think this is a better way of doing business if we are doing business like this, and it should become the consistent way for temporary structures. They're not building a permanent house there. In the same way as wind farm, caravans, whatever it might be, it's a business opportunity which will have a lifespan or more. But the thing is, if it doesn't, I think we always have to protect ourselves for cases as a local authority. What happens when things don't work out after 10, 15 years and you're basically left with a mess, or somebody else's business that's failed, or a house, you know, whatever it might be. So I'm sure it won't happen in this case because of the location and everything, and what seems to be in front of us looks like a good offer. But equally, I think it just protects us as a local authority and the region and the values of a regional scenic area. So I think it's reasonable, and we should probably adopt that approach going forward. It would seem more responsible. Do you know what I mean? If we were thinking of our children coming back to clean up our mess in 30 years after we've all retired or whatever. So yeah, thank you.
Right, no, I'm just thinking an application. I'm sure it'll be coming in shots for containers, and I think it would be absolutely appropriate to put that type of, because it's somebody trying to start a business. Containers And if the business establishment is successful, they want a permanent building, so therefore they come in for a new application after that. It's similar but different. And LDP 3, I think, that's where it should be mentioned, isn't it, in regards to these, should that policy change, in regards to, let's have that full, thorough and frank debate then. Can you outline our decision, please? Thank you. Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. So members have agreed to reverse the decision of the appointed officer and approve the application, as the proposal would not have a significant unacceptable landscape and visual impact within the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area and the Galloway Hill Regional Scenic Area. The scenic landscape would not be jeopardised and the development would not be contrary to MPF 4, Policies 4 and 30, or the Frizzy Galloway Local Development Plan 2, Policies OP1, OP2, ED9, NE1 and NE2, and associated supplementary guidance on design, quality and placemaking or planning guidance, and the Fleet Valley National Scenic Area Management Strategy, with the conditions attached that Robert outlined earlier, with the temporary permission changed to 30 years.
Councillor Thompson. Yep.
Just in the conditions, so you did outline a few, but no, it wouldn't be a primary residence. I think that was one that you'd touched on. Yeah.
Do you want to go for them again, Robert, just to be sure? Tracy's got them here then.
I've got the occupancy would be for tourism accommodation, and then in line with the definition of caravan, it would be temporary for 30 years, and the design and finishes would be agreed and delegated to officers. The 8 road conditions that are attached within your papers, the archaeology condition, and also had noted the dark skies limitations, and just a action point for officers to liaise with council tax.
Got that, members? Excellent. Thanks so much for that, Tracy. That's the decision. Members, it's been a very eventful day today. Enjoyed every minute of it. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks very much.